Today, we are covering the Unpruned, the Changed, and the new abilities that Unholy Death Knight has gotten for Shadowlands and for the pre-patch. We'll also go over how they perform in comparison to each other, and we'll go over the general feel and performance of Unholy DK in its current form. Alright, so first off, I'm sure most of you have already heard about the Unpruned Abilities, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's get through it real quick. Anti-Magic Zone, Lichborn, and Good Death Pact, renamed to Sacrificial Pact, have all been unpruned and made baseline. Gargoyle has also been made baseline and has been replaced by a new talent that we will talk about a little bit later. All of this adds more offensive and defensive strength to the spec, and definitely adds a little bit more flavor. As for performance, I've outlined in a couple of other videos now that Lichborn plus Death Coil can heal you for about 45% of your maximum health during the Lichborn window, which is nice. However, in the current state of PvP, it feels extremely weak if not pointless, which I now believe after more testing is caused by the just unbalanced and bursty and unpredictable nature of the PTR right now, not necessarily an issue with the ability. Getting hit by Wake of Ashes while Lichborn is active, since you are now an undead target, it hits you for a ton. The last time I made the mistake of using Lichborn in the presence of a Ret Paladin in Arena, I literally got hit for half of my health and I got stunned for like 3 or 4 seconds. It was devastating. Other than that though, all the other unpruned abilities are performing as expected. Now for some ability and talent changes, and trust me, Unholy definitely got a lot of them. First off, we have Unholy Frenzy, which has been changed to Unholy Strike. It is now a single weapon attack that costs 2 runes. It's on the same cooldown as it was before. It generates 4 festering wounds, and it gives you a 15% haste buff for 12 seconds. It also does a fairly devastating amount of damage up front, which is really nice. I know some of you really love this change, and I know some of you really hate this change. So here we go. In my opinion, I like the change a lot, and here's why. It's made the burst sequence of Unholy Strike so much smoother. Now you can Unholy Strike into Apocalypse, into Gargoyle, and it still costs 3 GCDs, but you no longer need to prep those 4 for Apocalypse, which makes the overall experience and feel of the spec so much smoother. I also like the upfront damage that it now has. It hits really hard, almost as hard as Apocalypse, and it adds a lot to the upfront damage of the Unholy DK burst, which makes it a lot of fun in PvP. Overall, the ability doesn't feel any weaker. It actually feels stronger, even though I don't really notice the haste buff at all, since I'm used to playing like 100% plus haste on live. I do wish that they hadn't nerfed the haste bonus by 5% though. But Unholy Strike isn't the only new talent added to Unholy DK. To replace Gargoyle's spot in the tree, we also got Unholy Pact, which is basically the Hellchain's Azurite trait, which also comes with an 8% strength buff. We also got changes to the Army of the Damned talent, which now causes your Army of the Dead to summon a Magus of the Dead to fight alongside you for its duration. Unholy Blight was also changed to increase pet damage done to the target by 5% per stack, and you get those stacks pretty much instantly, so basically this means 20% increased damage to the target when you have Unholy Blight active. And finally, Soul Reaper got reverted to its original state, which is a execute ability on an 8-second cooldown. It has a single rune cost, and after 5 seconds of it being on the target, it explodes and does execute level damage, which is pretty sweet, but it no longer returns any runes. Now that we're all up to date and on the same page about the Unholy DK ability and talent changes, now let's talk a little bit about performance and talent builds. All the changes and additions to the talent tree have completely turned the meta on its head. For the level 15 talent row, Infected Claw is completely non-viable. It flat out underperforms in comparison to All Will Serve, even over a long, consistent, drawn out battle. Clawing Shadow adds no damage to your rotation. It is simply a ranged Scourge Strike. For the level 25 talent row, Bursting Swords is completely dead. It does the least amount of damage on this entire row, about 15% less damage in Ebon Fever, and about 31% less damage than Unholy Blight when paired with All Will Serve. On top of that, Bursting Swords has actually been target capped to 8 targets. Ebon Fever doesn't compete with the Unholy Blight / AWS Superstar combo either. It falls behind both in single target and AoE damage, and it also makes you feel extremely rune starved because you have to cast Outbreak twice as often. Feels bad. Unholy Blight paired with All Will Serve completely and totally blows every other choice in these two rows out of the water. No comparison in upfront quick bursty damage over a short fight or long-term consistent damage over a long fight. The reason why Unholy Blight is so powerful that it's completely shifted up the way that we do our first two rows of talents is because of the way it scales with that pet damage that I mentioned earlier. It makes your pets do 20% increased damage to the target. Now, let me just read you a little list of all the pets that DK can have active at one time, real fast. We have your regular pet, the All Will Serve pet, your Gargoyle, the 4 pets from Apocalypse, and the ghouls and Omegas of the Dead from Army of the Dead. And if you're in PvP, then you've got the Abominable Snowman as well. I mean, the Abomination. The results are devastating damage. For the level 30 talent row, it has no changes, and it also has no bearing on performance, so we're just going to be skipping past this one. For the level 35 talent row, Harbinger's Doom is dead as can be. It causes you to lose about 2% average DPS, which isn't that big of a deal, but the dead zones are real. Lots of dead zones, very inconsistent and unsmooth gameplay. Pestilent Pustules is the only real option on this entire row if you want smooth gameplay and if you want the highest consistent damage output. Soul Reaper, as I mentioned before, has been reverted to its original state as a execute ability, which is great, except there is only one problem. And that's that it's on the same row as Pestilent Pustules. You see, if you don't take Pestilent Pustules, your DPS will be on average 2 to 3% lower than if you had taken it. On top of that, it will have you saying, "Holy dead zones, Batman," the entire time. Soul Reaper is probably going to be the go-to pick for PvPers since it helps you to secure kills. And it'll probably be a very popular option in Raiding and Mythic Plus too, because they want to take advantage of that execute window to fluff their parses. But you will be doing 2 to 3% less damage outside of those execute windows as a sort of tax. And what I think is more important than 2 to 3% damage is it just feels bad. Moving on to the level 40 talent row, Death Pact is still a joke. Moving on. As for the level 45 row, I was really hoping that Defile might possibly be better than Epidemic since it's now the untarget capped version of Death and Decay, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Because personally, I don't like Epidemic. I don't like it a lot. However, I tested it as best as I could, and Epidemic still does more damage per target and also infinitely scales, so Epidemic is the best option on this row for all content, period, still. As for the level 50 talent row, this is where things finally get interesting. First, we have Unholy Pact, which centers around your Dark Transformation. This ability actually does a pretty good amount of damage. It does have the lowest burst damage of all the talents on the level 50 row, however its consistent damage is actually higher by about 4%, so that's pretty great. It's also a really easy build to use, so I could imagine it being good for questing or maybe for new players. Our next talent is Unholy Strike. This talent is the best talent in terms of consistency, burst, and feel. And that's because, well, it does that huge bit of damage up front, and you no longer have to set up your Apocalypse with Festering Strike anymore, which allows you to go straight into the burst, and it makes the experience much smoother. Finally, we have Army of the Damned, which actually does the same amount of burst damage as the Unholy Strike build, which would tie it for first place if it wasn't for the fact that this talent completely and totally relies on Army of the Dead to match the same output as Unholy Strike. When Army of the Dead is on cooldown, its burst is about 23% lower than Unholy Strike's. Since Army of the Dead is such a long cooldown, even with picking the Army of the Damned talent, which reduces the cooldown of Army of the Dead by 5 seconds every time you death coil, you still can only make this build really hit its true potential every 5 to 6 to sometimes even 7 minutes, depending on kind of what's going on. Overall, this makes it fall short of Unholy Strike. Now that we have the talents straight and we know what the best talents are, let's talk about some AoE cap changes. By the way, let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the Unholy DK changes and how do they affect you? Am I alone in really liking these changes and being a little hyped, or are you guys liking them too? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, so now for AoE cap changes. So Death and Decay, not the Defile version, but regular Death and Decay, was nerfed. It has been AoE capped to cause your Scourge Strike to only hit up to 4 targets that are standing in it, instead of all targets standing in it. And Bursting Swords has a cap at 8 targets, which is part of why it's now a dead talent. As for abilities that are not target capped, we have Unholy Blight, which is another good reason why it completely killed Bursting Swords. And Defile is also uncapped, like I said before, allowing Scourge Strike to hit all targets that are standing in your Defile. However, this talent doesn't deal nearly as much damage per target as Epidemic does, and so it doesn't compete, making it a dead talent. Epidemic, Unholy Pact, and Outbreak are all completely un-AoE capped. They infinitely scale and hit everything that you apply it to. Unholy DK feels good, and it has way more talent choices, at least interesting ones, than it did back in BFA, which I like a lot. It's also performing really well versus other classes. Its single target damage is much higher than it was in BFA, and its AoE damage is almost the same. You do notice a little bit of loss in damage from the Scourge Strike nerf thing since you're not taking Defile, but you do make up for that with Unholy Blight, which does a lot of AoE damage, by the way. I would say the only issue I have with Unholy DK is that it feels like it's got a couple too many GCDs. Abilities that really catch my attention when it comes to what has a GCD that shouldn't are Unholy Blight and Dark Transformation. See, Unholy Blight added back in an extra GCD that was removed by the Unholy Strike fix, and since we're adding that one back in, it just kind of feels bad. If I could just like snap my fingers and make any change I wanted to, it would definitely be to probably take Dark Transformation off the GCD, especially since Blizzard's made it clear that any ability that does damage on activation, they would prefer to have on the GCD, which kind of means that Unholy Blight doesn't really fit the bill. I also wish that Soul Reaper was just baseline. It used to be baseline, and right now we've got to either pick that, or we've got to pick the only ability that makes Unholy DK not feel like Holy Dead Zones, Batman! If you've been wondering about how Frost DK has been doing in the PTR, especially two-hand Frost DK, then make sure you check out my video right up here where we go over the current state of Frost DK. Make sure you hit that like button, you subscribe, and you ring that bell notification to get notified every time I upload a video. Also, check me out on Twitter and Twitch for more content, and thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a great day. Holy Dead Zones, Batman!